Hey there, everybody out in podcast land. It's Wes and Andrew again, back with another episode of Different Strings, a guitar podcast. Are we a guitar podcast or are we a guitar adjacent podcast?
I think we're a guitar and guitar adjacent podcast. I think
All
it
right,
depends
there
on
we
the
go.
week, right?
Yeah, and this episode is going to be how to be in a we're going to talk about how to be in a band or how not to be in a band. Basically, we're going to look at navigating band dynamics a little bit. We're going to tell you stories about some of the good and bad things that we've been through in our bands, mostly bad, I got to say, because those are really the fun stories to hear how effed up everybody else is so that you feel better about your like minorly shitty situation compared to our, horrifying things that have happened in our band pasts. And so I think this is going to be a good episode, whether you've been in a band for a long time and you're struggling with figuring out how to fit in, or if you're just starting out and you're thinking about starting your first band or you're in your first band. I think you're going to get some insights in here because for better or worse, being in a band is not always about the music. So
What?
I know, it's crazy. And before we get into our appetizer, we now have our shortened and impressively streamlined list of how to find us on the web that Andrew's going to share with you, right?
I mean, I'm
3,
willing to if you think it's
2,
necessary. I don't know. I think
1,
the audience is
go.
hi. You can reach us on the web at www.differentstringspodcast.com. That's it. That's the end of the intro. No more Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, email
X.
nonsense.
It's X now, not Twitter.
I'm not doing that. And the thing is that I've always wanted my own website.
Bing.
And now I have one. So achievement unlocked, right? And I'm happy about it. I have differentstringspodcast.com. It's all mine. I'm going to start posting, you're going to start posting blogs, stories, probably gear reviews, picture, like whatever we want. That's what the website's going to be. It's going to be our gift to the internet.
There you go. And there is already a blog post up written by yours truly. And if you're not watching this on the YouTube, then yours truly is Wes. And maybe you recognize my voice. I don't know. And we're going to get going with our appetizer here now that we've got that under control. Differentstringspodcast.com. Please join us. And I'm gonna go ahead and confess or admit that I thought of these questions because since we're talking about being in bands, I want to learn a little bit about Andrew's band history, which means that I have to give up a little bit about mine. So Andrew, tell me about your very first band that you were ever in, the name of the band, what the personnel were, not necessarily their names, but what they did, what kind of music you played, how old you guys were, all that kind of stuff. Hit me. First band.
Out of the gate, Archer. We were called Archer. Do I know why we were called Archer? No. One of the guys in the band named the band. I don't remember why. I don't know where the name came from. It's Archer. We're 14 years old. Okay. So
makes for a cool logo.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Later on, some guy came up with a pedal and put an Archer, a little horsey Archer on the pedal. Right. Now, did he get that from us? Most likely. Very possible that Bill Finnegan happened upon 14-year-old Andrew's band. And okay, so Archer, and we were a cover band. So
full covers, no originals?
No originals.
Okay.
Not even an attempt to write a song at this point. It's me, and then you had a guy on vocals. I'm going to say names. I'm not going to use last names. Chris on vocals, Jesse on drums, and me.
Okay. So 4-piece, no bass player.
I'm sorry. Where did you go to college? Let me go back. Andrew on guitar. I know. Your mind. Something's missing. Me on guitar, Chris on vocals, Jesse on drums. What's missing from this picture?
Bass player.
That is correct, sir. What do you think that band sounded like without a bass player?
Sounded like listening to AM car radio.
If we were that good. So no bass player. We tried to play songs by the Kinks, the
Good
Who,
choice.
yep, the Beatles.
Good
A
choice.
lot of bands that began with the. Have you
The
seen it? Okay. Also the Van Halen, the Black Sabbath, and the Queen. We played
nice.
a lot of songs by the Queen. Chris was a big fan of the Queen. So, um, this was my not only my first band, my first electric guitar, which I had
Cool.
previously mentioned in another episode, was an Ibanez Roadstar 2 in what I called None More Black. It was black guitar, black pickups, black pickguard. Everything was in the shade of Darth Vader. Now, this was not my first amplifier because I hadn't had one of those yet. So no amp.
No amp.
But weirdly, I had pedals.
Huh. That is a little
Guitar,
weird.
yeah, guitar and pedals, no amp. The good news is Chris was more than willing to lend me his PV bass amp.
Okay.
Um,
So guitar, pedals, bass amp,
uh,
owned by the singer who was not a bass player.
had a bass but wasn't playing bass in the band because he
Okay.
was singing. There was no multitasking. This was 1984.
Well, I'm guessing you guys were pretty young. Did you say how old you were and I missed it?
14,
14.
precocious 14 years old.
I couldn't sing and play at the same time at 14, mostly because I hadn't started playing yet at 14.
Yeah. So interesting story about this band. We sucked. We sounded like hot garbage. We were 14. I mean, there's
Yeah.
that. Also, no bass player, so there's that. And I was playing my guitar. Can I plead? Guitar pedals, distortion pedals, because duh. And into bass amp. With a very large 15-inch speaker
And all that implies.
And all that implies. And we were all new, very new at our craft. Now, eventually, Archer was taking off like a rocket. I mean, we were just huge in our basement. I mean,
so you're taking off like a rock.
How dare you, sir? I'll tell you what, our biggest fans were Chris's parents and the two next door neighbors because it was a row home. So
yeah. So they had to listen to it too.
Yeah, but we had to hire a manager.
Of course.
Because he asked nicely. And of course, at 14, you need a manager.
Yeah.
He was also 14, so he clearly was an expert in the industry.
Yeah.
And his first order of business, believe it or not, actually not a bad suggestion, was that we bring on a background singer because none of us were doing anything in that department. Keep in mind, I mentioned to you we were playing songs by the Kinks, the Who, the Beatles, Van Halen, and Queen.
Yeah.
All of which predominantly feature harmony vocals.
Yeah.
So we weren't doing that because we weren't.
Well, good for Jake.
So Jake said, I know someone. And he introduced us to a very adorable local girl. Her name was Tracy. And
now, I'm not one for coincidences, but isn't your wife's name Tracy?
I'm not getting. Nope. No. Not saying. Nope. I have something better for later.
Okay.
But gotcha. So all you need to know is that was my first band. And I got to tell you, we played a gig at the local roller skating rink. When I told you before that one of my favorite albums was Moving Pictures, and I used to go to the roller skating rink and skate backwards to Tom Sawyer, that same roller skating rink hosted a band, a 14-year-old band.
Nice.
Because we asked nicely, and they're like, yeah, why not? And
Jake really knew what he was doing.
Got us a gig. That 14-year-old son of a bitch got. I'm laughing at this guy, and he got us a freaking gig at the roller skating rink, and it was a shit show. We were terrible. Again, no bass player.
And 14.
But I have pictures. I have a couple of pictures of that day, and I mean, I believe it or not, I will never forget that band experience. I mean, don't talk to those guys anymore, most of them. And I have very fond memories of cutting my teeth and learning songs by those bands back then. And it was really cool. And I will say another thing about that band is I fell in love with pedals. like that. I had two boss pedals. I'm talking 14, and I had two boss pedals. Like I was rocking some
Killing it.
decent preamp was great. It was everything after that last pedal. It was a distortion pedal and a delay pedal. Do you know what that a delay pedal at 14? Dude, come on.
Crazy.
I was the guy. People were like, "Do you Andrew's got a delay pedal? Hire that guitar player." And I was
Yeah.
terrible, but I was the only guy with a delay pedal. So yeah. Anyway, that was my first band. What about yours?
My first band, was I was a little bit older. We were all about 15 and 16,
Okay.
and the band was called Penguin Lust, which I don't know if you remember the
I
cartoon
do. I
Bloom
do.
County.
I
So
do.
we got that from Opus. He went into that condition quite regularly. I was a huge Bloom County fan, and
Me
that was my
too.
suggestion. I
Oh
will
man.
confess to that.
All right,
So
cool.
it was me, my best friend Eric, who also played guitar. I think I told this story before. Like, we met up, and he taught me the chords that he knew, and I taught him the chords that I knew, and we started this band.
Okay.
He was also a pretty good singer, so he sang lead, and we got his friend Sean to play bass
Show
and
off
show off. I
with your
know,
bass
right?
player.
And you know, I told you, remember I told you about the guy that was in my band that would not cut his strings and dragged him on me at that show and kept shocking me?
Mhm.
That was Sean. Um,
Oh.
and then this kid that lived down the street from Eric, I don't know what his real name was. Everybody called him Nut, and he spelled it with two T's, so I'm guessing that was like maybe his last name or something. He played drums, and
Okay.
we played our 4 or 5 little originals that we had.
Originals, even
Yeah,
writing
yeah,
songs. Impressive.
yeah. And then we played some current rock covers, some classic rock covers. I remember doing now, not at first, not early on, but later in the run of this band, I remember doing Dream On was the first song I ever played a guitar solo live in front of people on.
Whoa.
And some other songs like that. So eventually we tried to keep it at about a 50-50 mix of covers and originals. Before we got out of high school, by the time, my senior year rolled around, we had changed our name to Dawn at Dusk. We thought that was very clever.
Mm.
And at that point, we had 7 members. We had,
Seven.
yes, 7. We added a kid called Leonard as our lead singer. We had a kid called Tim playing saxophone for us, and a kid called Rich playing keyboards. Um, and I think we changed drummers in there somewhere because Nut was much more into football than playing in a band. I don't remember, it was kind of a series of drummers. And we played together even the year after I graduated from high school. I didn't go away to college. But the year after that, Eric graduated from high school and he went away to college. And that was kind of the end of that band. But that was kind of a fortuitous thing because I still wanted to keep playing in bands. So I know what the second question is. So I'm going to finish that story in just a second. So here's the second question.
Okay.
So that's your first band. Tell me about the band that you were in for the longest. Kind of the
Longest.
same questions and how that all worked out.
Okay. So longest, truth be told, none of my bands really lasted a very long time. There's something about the Philly scene that chews up bands and spits them out.
That's a shame.
Yeah, no, it's just a fact that, it's not a great scene. You don't get paid unless you're a cover band, and the cover band scene in and of itself is a nightmare because how competitive it is, and how and I'm talking like when I was coming up, so it could be different now, although I don't
Yeah.
think it is. So for original bands in particular, it's tough. So there's no scene for it. There's no crowd. Like, people don't want to go out and see original music, and it just sucks. But the band I'm talking about is called Sugarfish, named for little red sugary fish, also known as Swedish
Sweet.
fish.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Sugarfish. Now, what band? Well, I would describe this band as Think Tears for Fears, but like with a 70s sensibility. Now Tears for Fears was a duo primarily, but you know, they had a lot of like, by the later albums, they were getting a lot of musicians to help them. They
Yeah,
were like full. So I
as you
think of
do.
those later albums, but instead of like having the 80s sensibility, that I'm talking like more of a classic rock thing.
Gotcha.
Um, so the I say the final lineup, I say final because everyone in the band was always a band member except the bass player. We had sort of a little revolving door on the bass player thing for a minute, but eventually we landed on this lineup. So we had Mike C on rhythm guitar, and Mike S on drums. We had Jules on keys, Deb on vocals, and then Mitch on bass and me on lead guitar. Now, I have to say about Mike C, he wasn't just the rhythm guitar player, he also owned the studio where we rehearsed. And when I mean studio, I mean he converted his basement in Edgewater Park, New Jersey, into a real home studio.
Nice.
Right. It wasn't like mine where, you know, my bed's there and my guitars are there. I'm talking like he had, you know, he had a control room, he had a live room, he had two vocal booths, he had a drum room. Like this was real. He spent a lot of money to do this, mind you. And this was back in the day when um, he was still in the beginning working on reel to reel.
Nice.
So,
That's
right,
awesome.
yeah, just to give you an idea of how long ago this was. And then he eventually moved to ADAT. Now, it was through Mike C that I learned about Sweetwater. So he got everything through Sweetwater. And really back then, there was not a lot of choices in digital audio workstations. It
Yeah.
was Mark of the Unicorn and which was Digital Performer, and Pro Tools. Those were your two choices. He went with Mark of the Unicorn. So that's for you, you know, gear nerds out there. This is just the studio shifted, you know.
Yeah.
The other thing about Mike is, as a rhythm guitar player, he had Strat, which was 70 Strat, weighed about 13 pounds, into a Mesa Boogie DC-10,
Oh, great amp.
and that was it.
No pedals,
No
no fooling
pedals,
around.
no lead. His rhythm tone was clean always, and if and when he took a solo, which was very very rare, he hit the channel switch button onto the lead channel and played his lead. That was it.
And that's the only
No
time you ever use the lead channel.
no pedal boards, no outboard effects, no rack, nothing,
No
nothing.
tuner.
No tuner, nope. So that was that. So that's a lineup and a little bit of a history on Mike. And like I learned a lot working with Mike in that band. Um, the problem with that band is I would say we struggled to write songs efficiently. Like we
Yeah.
wrote like maybe 5 songs in the whole time we were together. Um, for two reasons. One, because all the musicians in the band were very different, in my opinion, and we were perfectionists, so it was very hard to like land on a song. We were all very different types of musicians, all very different background. There wasn't really a leader of the band, so things just really didn't gel all the time. The other thing is that Mike, the studio owner, was really more interested in honing his craft as an engineer, so he just recorded us playing the same few songs over and
Over and
over and over,
over.
trying to
Yeah.
get better. Yeah, it became more of a recording project than a band, and we only played like 1 or 2 gigs. That was really about it. Um, anyway, so another thing is the singer was an ex of mine, and although
So that's not
enough
awkward at all.
no, and enough water had flown on enough water had flown under the bridge. I think I'm using that metaphor correctly.
Maybe
For their
flowed.
flowed, flown, flew under the bridge, so that I wasn't, words are hard, so that it wasn't super awkward, but just awkward
Just a
enough
little.
that like, right. So one day, here's the best part of this band. Here's really why I wanted to tell this story. So
Gotcha. How long did Sugarfish last?
I don't remember. I have a poor long-term memory. I
Okay.
would say a couple years, but that's a
Couple
long
years.
time for any band that I was in.
All right.
There one day, Mitch invited me over to his house to hang out, just to hang.
Because
He
bass
lived,
players do that.
yeah, and he and I were close. We both lived in the Northeast Philadelphia area. We were both Jewish. We both got along really well. I don't know why I mentioned we were both Jewish. That's not relevant to the story, but it kind of is. Like we were like we clicked. There was some we just clicked, Mitch and I. Um, so he invited me over to hang out one day, and when I knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, whatever I did, a someone answered the door.
That was not Mitch.
That was not Mitch. She
Okay.
was short, adorable, and she introduced herself as Mitch's sister, but she looked really familiar. In fact, she looked a lot like the girl that Jake hired to be our background singer 11 years prior.
Oh, that girl Tracy.
Is that what her name was?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So she looked really familiar. Now, you should know that because Tracy was in a band with me and she was cute 11 years prior, I tried to date her.
Of course you did.
I violated number one rule,
Yeah.
and it didn't go well. I was already dating someone that she knew, and she knew that. And Tracy
Oh,
was a
dude.
good girl. I know I suck. Please, I don't even want to think about it. So it didn't really go anywhere. So she answers the door, and I kind of froze. Like, I think that's the
Uh,
same girl. Yeah.
uh, uh.
Now, mind you, I think she looked pretty much identical. Like she didn't age.
Right.
I, on the other hand, lost every hair on my head in the 11 years. I did not look the same. Okay. So she invites me in and we're talking, we're having small talk. And after a while, I'm waiting for her to drop a clue, like she remembers me. And of course, she's not dropping these clues. So I'm like, do you know who I am? And I'll never forget her response was, should I?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Any chance of feeling good about myself in that moment was shut
Oh,
down.
that's
So I'm
awesome.
like, yeah, I'm, Andrew, the rock god that dated for like 5 minutes 11 years ago. She went, oh yeah, I remember you. And
Sorta.
yeah, yeah, whatever, dude. And just so happens, I don't know, I charmed her to the point where that woman did become my wife, and
That time it stuck.
it stuck this time. I grew up. We've been married for like 24 years since
That's
then.
awesome.
So no, that's so how, but it was really weird that we had basically lost touch for 11 years. I moved away
Yeah.
and then moved back, and she had dated a friend of mine, and then that ended poorly, and like we just reconnected. So it turned out that Mitch was not so cleverly disguising this invite over. It was basically a setup. She was
Nice.
single, I was single. He thought we'd be good together, and yeah, we started dating. But here's the thing. So she's not really Mitch's sister.
I was gonna
Um,
ask, is she really Mitch's sister?
no, no, I'm not. I wouldn't marry a Jew. I'm like, are you crazy? No, I can't. There can't be two Jews in this house. We'd kill each other. No. So Mitchell grew up on his family grew up near Tracy, and their families were really close. Mitch was really
Gotcha.
close with Tracy's older brother. He was around so much he became like her older brother. She looked at him,
Gotcha.
and they were really close back then. So, and I'm still close with Mitch today. He is basically like family.
Does he still play bass?
He does. First of all, he is a great bass player. If he's listening to this, he's
Hey,
going
Mitch.
to, yeah, dude, thank you for hooking me up with Tracy. He's a great bass player. He's a great singer. Mitch can multitask. He can actually do two things at once. I've seen him in bands play bass and sing at the same time, and he does it well. He has a great voice, a lot of range. I've always been really impressed with his ability to sing and play at the same time. He's a good bass player, he's a good singer, and he's a great songwriter. If he is listening, he thinks I'm full of it right now, and I know he thinks that, but the truth is, no, he's really great musician. He's and also does the home studio thing. He was one of the first guys to do after Sugarfish broke up. Mitch was like, I'm doing the home studio thing. I can do that. He does it.
Nice.
He dedicated his time to it. And I love the guy. So he's also the guy that told me to get a real logo, which I did. So got to give him credit for getting a good logo for the podcast. Yeah. So
Good
he's
suggestion. Thanks a lot, Mitch.
yeah, man. So yeah, so Tracy, she enters my life at 14. She re-enters it later. I can't shake her.
Yeah.
There's no getting rid of her. She's
Yeah.
like
Well, hey, a keeper's a keeper.
seriously, I don't know how I managed to land that fish, but yeah, she's awesome. So
Sugarfish.
anyway,
That's how you did it.
ooh,
Nice, huh?
you are a journalist. With the words, you're good. Man, with the words, this guy. All right, so
Well,
I've
my
talked long
my
enough.
longest stint was really more of a partnership than like one band. So after the breakup of my high school band, um, I still wanted to be in a band, and I met this guy who's a little bit older than me, and he worked at the music store down the hill from my house next to Dale City Music. So I could walk there, and I used to walk there and buy records and tapes, and then later CDs. And this guy was always there. He worked at the record store. He was a cool dude, looked cool, had long hair. Um, and one day I was in there, and a mutual friend said, "Hey, do you know Tom? Tom is a singer. His band just broke up." And I was like, "Oh, is that so? You want to be in another band?" "I want to be in another band." And so I called Sean, and we got this other friend of mine called Mike to play drums. And we kind of banged around in, it was another 50-50 band. Oh, I take that back. It wasn't Sean, it was Scott. And Scott and I switched back and forth who played bass and who played guitar. Basically, whoever wrote the song played guitar, and the other person played bass. And then
Cool.
Scott played bass on most of the covers that we did. And that was like a transitional thing. And then Eric didn't do real well in college. He came back to town. Scott moved away. Then Sean came back in the picture. We kept up with Mike for a little while, and Tom. So that kind of became the new band, was me, Eric, Sean, Mike, and Tom. And Mike didn't really work out. He was a really good hard rock drummer, and we kind of didn't want to be a hard rock band anymore. So this is like the early 90s ish. Luckily Eric knew somebody. We got a new drummer called Max, and then that band was called Hipper Than Thou.
Dude, one of the greatest band names that ever existed.
Which I did not think of it. It was on the list of when we were trying to come up with a band name. I did not think of it, but I loved it, and so I pushed for it. And then through various machinations, Tom and I played together for about 12 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And we had our lineup changed, sometimes 4 members, sometimes 5. After a while, I got tired of dealing with a string of rhythm guitar players, and so I just made Tom learn how to play guitar, which was not the easiest thing in the world. He'd never picked up a guitar, but he went out and he had a good job, so he went out and he bought a decent electric guitar. He bought a decent amp. He had a Gibson The Paul.
I remember those.
Yeah, like a flat top bolt neck Les Paul. Decent guitar, put some good pickups in it. It sounded fantastic. It had a Marshall 112 combo. And at first it's really cool actually, because at first I tuned his guitar to open D, and he played every chord with one finger, and he could play our songs, and he just wouldn't play in the few covers that we did. He could play our songs, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had to take a break for some reason. I don't remember exactly why. Somebody like broke their foot or their leg or something. We had like 4 or 5 months off while this played itself out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, all right, listen, we're gonna amp up your guitar skills. This is what you got to do. And then so we went from open D to drop D, and from drop D to standard. And he never could play but like 2 open chords. He could play G and E, and that was it. He couldn't get C, but he could play power chords like a maniac. So, and that's all. And he just knew how to play our songs. And we we just kept playing together for a really long time. We eventually even lived together um, in a house where the band practiced in the basement and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, can I just
And
point out that you said 12 years,
yeah, 12 years I played with
longer
him.
than most marriages.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. It
Yeah.
really
And
is. That
yeah, we broke up. We finally broke up because and I'm not talking out of school. Nobody that knows us will deny this, but Tom was he struggled with addiction for most of his life. When I met him, he was in the process of getting clean. He did so and maintained that for a really long time, but especially heroin is really pervasive
mm,
when it gets a hold of you. He got back
yeah.
into drugs, unfortunately, and that led to friction between us because I wasn't willing to. I wasn't. I wouldn't put up with it, basically, and so I kind of put my foot down, and he chose drugs and the girl and not the band, and that was kind of the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
um we did reconcile some years later, made up. Unfortunately, he passed away relatively young. He was only 44 years old. He had a heart attack and died. And it was, because of the drug abuse in his life, and he'd had hepatitis. um he's lucky, given the time of his heroin use, that he never got HIV, but he did get he got whatever. I don't remember which hepatitis it is, but it's the bad one. And you need to know you have it so that you can get treated, and he didn't know he had it, so he never really got treated. And that just damaged his body, and so his heart gave out when he was just 44. But we played together for 12 years, and at the end of our run, we were 80% original, and we only did covers for fun. And I listened to the recordings, and hearing his voice come out of the speakers always gets me right there. Because he's not with us anymore. um but I don't mean to bring us down, but an appetizer has to end, and it's always a little sad when it does. I don't know, did I push that a little too much?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
look, it's part of your life, and I asked you to do this show with me because I respect you as a person and a guitar player, and you're keeping it real, and I appreciate those stories. But I first of all, mad respect for keeping a band together for 12 years. I mean, look, anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you haven't been in a band before, I assure you it is difficult to keep a band together, for a lot of the reasons you're going to hear. It's like having in a lot of ways, I view bands as being like a marriage between 4 or 5 or however many people.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, I think that's an apt analogy. And as we transition into our main course here,
mhm,
um it really is. It's like a cross between lovers and siblings, and think about all of your lovers and
right.
siblings and all of the things that have gone well and bad for you in those relationships, and now combine them with making music together.
The creative
And
edge, right?
yeah, and it's the possibility for excessive joy and complete disaster are kind of equal. But
Yeah,
hopefully the things that we're going to talk about here can help anybody that's listening, kind of press down on the side of the scale that edges towards joy and fun and making it worth it.
yeah,
It's that's one of the great things about having this body of experience, for all of the for as long as I've been playing guitar and for as much music as I've made. I've only really been in a kind of like a handful of bands,
hmm,
um because I tend to find people that I like to play with, and I want to play with them for a really long time. My two traditional band projects that I'm in right now, one of the people I've been playing with since 1993, and the other one I've been with some gaps, and the other one I've been playing with since 2002 or 3, also with some gaps, maybe 2005. So um I find, and I it's probably because of the way that I played with Tom, is because I got used to playing with a strong singer. And so when I found somebody who was a strong singer, I want to keep playing with them.
Mhm.
So Steve and Deborah are both strong singers and strong songwriters, and they they kind of help me even out. They show strength where I show weakness, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Both of them are good guitar players, but they're not lead guitar players, and they don't think the way I think. And, so they're good at writing the songs, and I'm good at making them sound like songs.
Well, I look, obviously we're about to get into this, but before we do, the reason I mentioned that having just what you said about you've been working with these musicians on and off for like 20 or 30 years.
Oh, oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. 1993 was a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah, it was. You said 93 like it was 5 minutes ago, but it was not.
No.
So anyone who's listening to this right now that knows me well is probably thinking I have no business giving anyone advice on how to be. Just going to put it out there. But remember, the episode is also called How Not to Be in a Band. And if there's anyone who knows how not to be in a band, it's yours truly.
There you go.
So, admittedly, not always been the most patient bandmate, right?
Yeah.
We'll get into this, right? So I think you know the secrets of being in a band, and I know every possible way you can sabotage your band experience. I will share, and I'm going to come clean with a lot of them. So there's no lying. Anyone who's listening knows I'm a lot. There's a reason that I've been recording at home alone for the last, I don't know, 10 years. I'm a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I'm willing to admit that, right? This is a little bit cathartic for me, and hopefully will give people some advice to help them in their band journey.
Yeah. So you want to do this where I'll say the thing, and then I'll kind of set it up, and then you can chime in and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, then I'll keep us moving forward. So the first thing to be in a band and be successful in a band in the context of a band is you have got to keep it fun, because it's music. It's supposed to be fun. Now, that doesn't mean you can't put in a lot of hard work. It doesn't mean that you can't take it really seriously, but and I feel like, especially if you're going to be in a cover band where you're not writing music, you're playing music, you want the crowd to have fun. And if you want the crowd to have fun, you have got to have fun. And so you got to keep it fun. And especially, unless you're making like just boatloads of money,
Mhm.
and it really is your job, it has to be fun or it's not worth doing.
I mean, even if it is your job, it was your hobby at one point. You didn't get into music. Most people don't pick up the guitar because they're like, I want to start making money with this.
Right.
So if you find yourself if in a band situation where you're making money, hallelujah. If that's your
Yeah.
goal, congratulations. Again, achievement unlocked. But even if that's your job, if you're not enjoying yourself, that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's not like, look, I work for an insurance company. Is it always fun? No, but it pays the bills. It keeps the lights on. Willing to tolerate a lot for that. When a band situation, even if I'm making a little bit of money, if it's not fun, very little tolerance for that.
Yeah.
However, define fun. And we all may have a different view of what is and is not fun, right? I mean, to be clear, I think fun is a generic term, but I in particular think, showing up for gigs prepared and playing a great gig, to me, that's fun,
Yeah.
right? But if your drummer is like, well, to me, fun is playing louder than everybody else in the band and improvising all night, well, that now is in conflict with what I believe to be fun. Well, you're having fun, but I am not. And
Right.
if I'm telling you that I want you to learn your parts, and you're like, well, that's not fun for me, well, then we have a problem.
We have a problem. Yeah.
And it's not like you're right and I'm wrong or vice versa. There is a clear conflict in our end goal. And it doesn't mean that one person's right or wrong. It just means we're not on the same page. We're not going down the same road together. So I agree with you. It needs to be fun, or what's the point? What is the
Yeah.
point?
Yeah. And for me, the most fun I have in the context of a band is recording. I love to do the recording stuff, but before that is writing the songs, workshopping the songs, then woodshedding the songs, getting everybody's parts where they need to be, getting the ideas worked out. To me, I just find that to be the most fun out of the whole process.
And I would argue that none of that is fun for me. For me, the
Yeah.
only fun I had was live performing.
Gotcha.
And however, I also recognize that maybe it wasn't the act that wasn't fun, it was my view of the act, and maybe it was who I was doing it with. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of factors to take into account, but ultimately, um I agree with you that it needs to be fun. So there
Yeah.
has to be fun involved, or there is just no point in doing it. And
Yeah, I'm really lucky in that the only time I really experienced situations, band situations that weren't fun, it tended to be bands that I was working for and I was observing it rather than being involved in it.
mhm.
And when you work for a band, I worked as a guitar tech, it's very easy to step back and not take sides and just be like, I'm just here to keep the guitars in tune and haul amps. I remember one of the bands I worked for um traded drummers. Their drummer left for some reason, and because I wasn't part of the band, I wasn't privy to the background, but they had a new drummer, and when he showed up at their rehearsal space for his first gig with them, the band's manager sent him home to change clothes, and because he wasn't wearing all black, and when he got back, she issued him a pair of sneakers. Here's your shoes, because that was them all wearing the same shoes was part of the band's image. And I could see in his face that he was not into that,
Mhm.
and it deflated him a little bit. And sure enough, he didn't stay with that band for very long. I
Well,
I watched them have to break in another drummer just a few months later.
so story time. I A friend of mine, actually a friend of ours, I don't want to say names because I don't want to, there's a little bit of drama involved, but a friend
Gotcha.
of
You can
ours,
tell me after we stop recording.
yeah, someone you and I know from the PRS forum. Um, he left a band he was in and recommended me to replace him. Um, they were a cover band. They primarily focused on heavy music, and
I
he
think I
wanted,
know who you're talking about.
yeah, and he wanted to do something more top 40, and like he wanted to get more wedding work. Basically, he wanted to make more money, and this band
Yeah,
was never going to. So
I
he,
definitely know who you're talking about.
yeah, and he moved on to one of the biggest bands in the area and stayed with them. It may still be with them. He was with them forever.
No, he's moved on to another band that's
Really?
even bigger. Yeah.
Oh, good for him. Um, so I filled in for him in this hard rock cover band. Now, for me, that was fun.
Yeah.
That's right up my alley,
Yeah.
or street, as they say in London, right up my street. So now, after I joined that band, things began to get not fun. And why do I say that? One, because they started to want to branch out into other types of music, which at the time I wasn't super interested in, but
Yeah.
I liked
Yeah.
the band, I liked the money. So I thought, okay, I can tolerate that.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not what you thought you were getting into.
Right, exactly. But again, I was capable of doing that type of music and whatever. When it continued to get not fun when they hired an image consultant,
Ooh.
and you just mentioned an image consultant. I'm telling you, it was weird to all of a sudden have an image consultant start dictating to me how I was going to dress for
Hmm.
gigs.
Yeah.
Um, Now there was apparently some sort of like stuff going on in the background with the lead singer. He wanted to do tribute. The band hired a manager. The manager specialized in tribute bands and was in the singer's ear that, dude, you can't do this type of music forever. You need to do, tribute music. I can get, I can do a
Yeah.
Bob Seger tribute band with you. Maybe your band is willing to like convert, right? But they hired an image consultant, and I wasn't a big fan of that. So that was the beginning of the end for me too.
You
Like,
took the package and moved on.
yeah, the money wasn't enough to warrant
Yeah.
that. And to be fair, like I wasn't. It was square peg round hole. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can look at me. I'm kind of a big boy. I have no hair. I'm not a rock. I don't look like a rock star. I mean, I could. I mean, in the right light and in the right band, so I can look okay. But I was working full time. I had a young son at home. I was never home on weekends. And then on top of that, now there's an image consultant dressing me. I'm like, this is weird.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of the end for me.
Yeah. And I feel very strongly that, you know, you kind of have your own style, but you do kind of it. I think the band's appearance is something that is one of those things that you kind of really need to talk about, among the band, so that there's no surprises, so that if there are expectations, they're put out. And I think for a cover band, for a wedding band, for those kinds of bands, there may be expectations as to
Mhm.
how you will dress.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing where, either everybody shows up in sweatpants or nobody shows up in sweatpants,
Right.
and I've been in a lot of played with a lot of different people, but all of my bands have been primarily, like jeans and some sort of rock shirt, is the dress. Actually, this shirt that I'm wearing right now is one of my gig shirts.
Okay.
It's just a plain black shirt with got a little collar on it, and it doesn't hold on to sweat, which is my favorite thing about it,
Mhm.
because I'm a sweaty dude.
Yeah, I do
But
that too. All right, so I think we're in agreement. So rule
yeah,
number one, keep it fun, right?
keep it fun. Rule number two, and we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here with this one, is to remember the difference between practice and rehearsal. Practice on your own time. Rehearsal is to get the band together on the material. So you have to show up knowing what you're supposed to be doing. You have to prepare. You practice to prepare for rehearsal, right? You never want to be the person in the band who shows up for rehearsal and doesn't know your parts.
Dude, you just lost half of our audience.
I know, and I'm sorry,
Now,
but I'm
I'm
not
telling.
sorry.
Do you know how many bands I've been in where this was the sticking point? This was what broke the band up, and it
Yeah.
was my inability to let go of this. This was the hill I would die on. This one, you, if you're in a cover band, learn the parts at home.
Yeah.
If you're an original band, learn the parts at home.
Yeah.
That that's it. Like, just
Especially in the modern age, where you can use something like GarageBand to throw
phrase
down
trainer.
a quick demo of anything and send it to everybody and say, hey guys, I recorded this to a click, so it's a nice steady tempo. Let's hammer this out. And
Mhm.
then when you get together, you can workshop those ideas, and you can get because once you start playing together, this thing might not work over that section, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
depending on what the keyboard player is doing, what the bass player is doing. I run into that a lot with seventh grade girl fight. We have a bass player and a keyboard player.
Another one of the
um
greatest band names to ever exist.
yeah, I can't take credit for it. So I have to, a lot of times I'll come up with something to a demo, and then that's just guitar and vocals, and then get in the context of the band rehearsal and have to tweak it, but then I'll go home and I'll practice the new part so that I've got it down for the next rehearsal and I'm solid with it.
Mhm.
Because there's almost nothing worse than, you got five people playing a song and one person is a beat behind because they're trying to catch up.
I'm telling you, this is such a pet peeve of mine. And if anyone, again, anyone listening to this who knows me knows that this is like, if you want to get under Andrew's skin, how to do it is to show up at practice and don't know your parts. And I now I admit to being somewhat of a perfectionist on my own.
No.
Excuse you. For my own, like, if my parts have to be perfect. I want to play my parts the best I can, and I know
Yeah.
I know perfect. Um, I want to play my parts the best I can. I don't expect everyone to do the same, but I do, and I've always expected the people I work with to come to rehearsal prepared. Just
Yeah.
learn the song. We aren't usually doing songs that are like groundbreaking, earth shattering. It's not like we're doing Dream Theater covers. I'm saying you can go home and learn a Tom Petty song. And cover bands will usually do like three, like they'll pick like a number, like we're going to learn 3 songs a week or 3 songs
Yeah.
every 2 weeks. Okay, if that's too much for you, raise your hand.
And say so. Yeah. Say,
Yeah.
guys, I can only handle 2 a week.
If you don't have the capacity, that's one thing. I'm talking about like willful, I'm not doing that because these are easy songs. I don't like them, so I'm just going to improvise them. Like, that's just willful, you know, willful
It's disrespectful.
disrespect for the rest of the band.
Yeah.
And when the reason I said this is the hill I'll die on is, again, I value my time with my family a great deal.
Yeah.
Okay. As any parent and husband and wife would. And any time away from them has to be worth it.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
it. And has to be
Yeah.
worth it for me. And if I'm sacrificing time away, my precious free time with my family to do something, make it worth my while. Show
Yeah.
up prepared. Don't disrespect me by showing up and telling me I don't like the song, so I'm not gonna learn them. Then why
Yeah.
are you here? Why are you in this band? You wanted to be here,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So
And improvisation has its place, but
yes,
like, once again, that needs to be something that you collectively as a band agree on ahead of time.
I
You
watched a
know,
great interview with Joe Walsh. Mitch Gallagher did it at Sweetwater, and he asked him about the tour he was on and why everything sounded so fresh. And Joe said he asked the band to understand the song structure, but don't play the songs the same way twice.
gotcha.
Now, that was Joe Walsh telling his professional paid band what to do and how to do it. Oh, I love that fill you did. Don't ever do that again. Like,
Don't ever do. Yeah.
I love that story, and I love that Joe did that. But let's be fair. This is Joe Walsh. Joe probably hasn't played the songs the same way twice.
Yeah. No kidding.
And he's a genius as far as I'm concerned, and he can do
Yeah.
no wrong. So there's a place. You're right. There's a place for improv, like John Mayer joining the Dead, and Trey Anastasio and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even in cover and original bands, there's a place for. But if your place improvising is not every song, that's
Yeah.
just again willful disrespect. So
Yeah. And I think that story highlights a really important thing that that is kind of underlying all of this is you have to understand the dynamic of your band. And in that context, the dynamic is Joe Walsh is in charge. Joe Walsh is the band leader,
mm-hmm,
and therefore what he says you does.
mm-hmm.
Now, in in a band that is a band and doesn't necessarily have a Joe Walsh style leader, then the decisions need to be a little more organic and agreed upon.
Democratic or diplomatic, however you want to put it.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
even if
I
you're the
agree.
new person in the band, you need to find your place in the dynamic. And sometimes that means, laying low for the first, few gigs and watching and observing and seeing how things shake out.
Getting the
And
lay of the
then
land, right?
exactly, instead of just jumping in and, throwing down on the table right there, you put your foot down and start, you know, being obstinate right away. There is a time and a place for that.
Mhm.
And I one of my all-time favorite bands is Queen, and there are lots of stories told by the members of Queen themselves about how much they would fight,
Yeah.
because they all had very strong ideas. And there's a great story about that Brian May tells about John Deacon, who is, widely acknowledged as the shy member of the band. He didn't talk much, he didn't write very many songs, but when he wrote a song, it was almost always a hit,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
This is the guy that wrote You're My Best Friend and Another One Bites the Dust,
Right,
two
right.
of the band's biggest hits,
Yep.
and so when he gets his dander up, he's probably right,
Yeah.
but that band had that dynamic where fighting and arguing was how they reached decisions. And if your band's not like that, you don't want to be the only person behaving like that.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think band dynamic, understanding your own personal band dynamic is a great like subtitle of and it kind of it's an underlying current to all of these things. Like
Yeah.
every situation is going to be different. And some, like if you see yourself as a natural leader and the rest of your band seems to defer to you, well then that's the band sort of like falling into its own little dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you are a natural leader and you're in a band with four other natural leaders, guess what? There's going to be butting of heads.
Yeah.
So you got to be a little more strategic and understand what hill are you going to die on, what's going to be important to you. Because if you just have four people arguing all the time and no one can reach any sort of decision, nothing gets done.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the time, once with me and Tom, because we kind of had a rotating roster of bass players and drummers, we kind of took the lead position, and we never really talked about it, which we probably should have. But he kind of took the lead with anything to do with gigs. He took the lead, and anything to do with the studio, I took the lead. Because that was the things that we both, each of us, loved the most. He loved playing live, and I loved being in the studio.
So
So
you found a natural dynamic that worked.
yeah, but we could have saved ourselves a little bit of grief if we had talked about it instead of just kind of butting heads for 6 or 8 months as we figured out the dynamic,
Yeah.
when we first started playing together. So, and I think we're kind of transitioning into the next rule. I think that rule number 2 is a 2-part thing: practice on your own time, learn your parts and play them. That's kind of a 2-piece rule 2. And we've kind of been transitioning into rule 3, which is remember that a band needs to be and exist in a respectful environment where everybody has to have the expectation of the same dynamic, or it's going to fall apart. And
Yeah.
I encounter that most when it comes time to criticize, right? And we say criticism is not always a bad thing. You criticism fosters growth. It fosters change, but that's constructive criticism. You have to understand that you can't just be like, dude, that sucked, don't ever do it again. Do this instead and play the thing the way you think it should be played, and expect them to do that exactly. That's a dick move every time. And I've been in that band. And I didn't stay in it very long. I did a stint in a math metal band. Lots of shifting time signatures, just lots of looking down at your guitar. It was really interesting music, but the other guitar player was not able to offer criticism in a constructive fashion.
Mhm.
And I remember very clearly at one point he got on my case because I wasn't downstroking every note in a riff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was I playing it exactly the same notes and exactly the same tempo as he was? Yes, I absolutely was, because I learned my part and practiced it. So I showed up to rehearsal with the part down 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't like the way I physically played it, and he thought it should be all downstroked. And he got on my case about that. And
Right.
I almost stabbed him in the neck with a drumstick, because like, you can tell me I'm playing a part wrong, but don't tell me how to pick it. Like, that rubbed me immediately the wrong way. And for the rest of the short time I was in that band, I couldn't take any criticism from him
Mm.
because of the way he offered it, and it would immediately get my back up.
So, first of all, yeah, I can understand. like, I can understand where you might be coming from with that.
Yeah.
So when you say we talk about fostering a respecting and respectful environment, we could probably do a whole show
Oh, absolutely.
on this topic alone, and I will try to avoid overdoing it here. But um, what are some tips you can provide that, because you've been in some of your bands, and you've worked with people a long time, so
Yeah.
clearly you're doing something right. I can't, I can only tell you anecdotally what I think, and I think I'm probably pretty good with that, but I would like to know from you specifically, what are some things that you did or did not do that helped you foster a respectful environment? And
I
not
can,
just with feedback, just in general.
yeah, in general. Number one thing for me, especially, is be on time. Be
Okay.
on time every time, because and that's a big thing in my life in general, and not
Okay.
just with my band, but especially because I don't think it's any surprise that musicians can be flaky. Creative people of all sorts can be flaky. And
I knit my eyebrows
I see that.
in confusion.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me, especially, people who are not people who disrespect my time annoy me. And when you're late, if
Annoy
we
me.
say rehearsal starts at 6:30 and you don't show up until 6:45, and then you have to set your gear up, you're disrespecting my time. And like you said, I'm away from my family, I'm away from my job, I'm away from my obligations. I'm here, I've committed this time to you.
Hmm.
You need to respect my time and commit that time to me.
Okay. So you're in a band, time is important to you. Maybe you're the one of the few, if not the only one in the band that feels that way. So now I'm picking your brain, and I'm purposely
Yeah.
I'm gonna poke the bear a little. I'm doing this for a reason. You show up on time, maybe your drummer or your singer show up. Here comes same guy every time, same girl every time, late. Okay. So now you, being the polite, respectful, gentle giant you are, hey, when you show up late to rehearse a gig, it shows disrespect to me. I'd really appreciate if you could make a concerted effort to
No,
show up on.
no, no. That would be the mature, responsible thing to do.
Oh, so you don't even, that's not
Uh,
even, that was me pretending that that's how you do it. You're saying you don't do it that way.
no, I don't do it that way.
But you said you have to learn how to give constructive criticism without being
Yeah,
a dick
you
about
do.
it. How do you do it?
I'm not very good at that. That's a weakness of mine. Um,
I was
you
giving you benefit of doubt here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, let me tell you how I've dealt with this in the
Yeah,
past.
I'm being serious. I really want to know
So
this.
I will out this guy, Sean, from my high school band that I played with for years and years and years after high school as well.
Okay. Okay.
We used to lie to him about when load in was, because we knew he was going to be 60 to 90 minutes late. So if load in
60 to
was,
90,
oh,
not even
he was
15
he
minutes.
was wretched with time,
Oh,
because
wretched.
he and honestly, it was a problem the whole time once we got out of high school and we started having to be places on time.
You driving to the wrong state and getting like, how are
No,
you
he
that
just didn't.
late?
He was not an on time person. He never has been. And
We just lie
so
to him.
if load in was 7, we would tell him it was 6,
Oh my
and he would
God.
show up at 7:30, and he
It's
would only
still
be a little
late.
late.
So how would you, okay, so that's one technique, lying, manipulation, but
Yeah.
would you, let's say you confronted him, hey, I need you, come on, you need you to show up on time.
Yeah, well, we tried that, and he was like, "All right, I'll do better. I promise." And so the next gig we had, we told him the real time, and he was an hour and a half late. And
So
so we
how do you
just
handle conflict like that? What do you do? How do you maintain a respectful environment?
well, back then I used to just drink and swallow it all, right? So now I just say something like, "Guys, take this a little bit seriously. If you can't be there at 7, say so, you know,
But
and
you're,
we'll set the time for another time."
but you feel that showing up that late, especially consistently, like it's a habit. It's not
Yeah.
like, we all know it can happen from time to time. You feel strongly that's disrespect,
Oh, absolutely.
but you're willing. I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Sure.
but I'm saying, I'm I'm trying to think of the right words. You understand that's who he is, so you're working around it. So your technique to resolve this conflict was to
Yeah.
understand this. I can't change him. I'm going to work around it. I'm going to work with it. Right? We
Yeah.
arguably that's how you. Okay. I think the reason I was trying to get you there is because I think one of the hardest things to do in a band situation is to deal with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And let me assure you, you cannot avoid conflict.
Nope.
There's no point in trying to. If you try to avoid conflict, you will only be miserable
And you just make it worse.
and make it worse. Um, you can't avoid it. What you need to do is deal with it. And when I say conflict, I am not using that in a derogatory, negative. Um, I'm not using it in the negative. I'm saying conflict is part of life. Earlier, when I talked to you about, you know, I like to learn my parts to perfection, and the drummer just wants to improvise. That is conflict.
Yeah.
So you can't avoid that conflict. What you can do is avoid dealing with it, which is a mistake,
Yeah.
because then it harbors resentment and it builds and builds and builds. So dealing with conflict effectively is one of the hardest things to do in a marriage, in a relationship, and in a band, at work. It's just hard, especially because I don't think people learn how to do it. What they're taught to do is avoid. What
Yeah.
they're taught to do is dictate. They're not taught how to resolve conflict peacefully. So here's anyone who's listening, here's some free advice. Okay. Don't avoid it. You have to deal with it. How to deal with it effectively. My way, Wes has a different way. My way would be address the facts. So in Wes's situation, if I'm Wes, hey, Sean, I just want you to know, when you show up late, it's disrespectful. I consider it disrespectful, and it's making it hard for me to enjoy my time with this band. I'd really appreciate if you can make a concerted effort to show up on time. End of that discussion. He may say, you know what, I'll try harder next time. He may say, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. He might. And
Okay.
yeah.
Could
Yeah.
be. So if he says I'll try and then he never tries, you have a decision to make, right? Because
Yep.
you can't change Sean.
Nope.
You can tell him how you feel, which you've done. You can tell him, you got that off your chest. You've expressed yourself. Now it's up to you to decide, am I going to continue to deal with this? Or am I going to do, which Wes did? Wes said, I'm going to continue to deal with this because it was more important to Wes. What Wes decided was having him in the band was more important than than dying on that hill.
Yeah.
Right? You made a decision. That was a conscious decision you made. I applaud you for that decision. I have made different decisions. Usually, I am willing to say, if you can't be here, don't be here.
Yeah. Well,
That's
and eventually that was one of the big reasons why we invited Sean to leave the band.
right. So eventually it was like enough is enough.
Yeah.
Because showing up late, by the way, isn't just disrespectful, especially to a gig. You're on the clock. Like you're
Yeah.
getting paid. Like there's a lot of times you don't have a choice. We're booking studio time. I'm really dating myself now. But anyway, long story short, be on time. So what other things do you think you do or do not do to foster a respectful environment?
I try to, and this is going to sound really basic and obvious, but when somebody is talking, I don't play my instrument. Right?
Or
I
when
don't.
they're tuning, don't play your instrument.
Well, I mean, we all use electronic tuners now,
Well, that's
but
a good point.
but yeah, in the older days, where somebody, when we were tuning to each other as kids.
Mhm.
But yeah, if somebody's trying to talk, then stop playing. Don't noodle, don't tap, don't anything. Let them say what they need to say, especially if they're talking to you. And I know that sounds like something that we shouldn't have to say.
Wait, so someone's talking to you and you're like,
Yeah, yeah.
what? And then you look up. Oh my God, I love that.
I played with that guy.
All
I
right.
play
So
he was a guitar player, and I played with that guy.
have you ever been in a band where everyone shows up and you're all starting to set up your gear and one person finishes first and then proceeds to play at top
Full
volume
volume. Yep.
while everyone else is trying to like settle in and talk, and there's just usually it's the friggin' drummer, or maybe it's the friggin' bass player, or your damn lead guitar, maybe it's never the singer, it's somebody is always playing and they're full volume while everyone else is quietly trying to like shuffle in and set up. And you're like,
Yeah.
dude, it's going to get so loud in here in like 5 minutes. Can't you just wait to stop? Just
Yeah.
not. I know. Um, Here's some things I've done to attempt to foster a respectful environment. Wait, I've tried. I'm telling you, I'm not always the bad guy. Um, I, I said earlier that I think bands are very much like marriages with multiple partners.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing, I think there's several things that I feel can make up um, a, a high functioning team or a successful marriage or whatever. I think number one is effective communication,
Yeah.
mutual respect, common goals, and strong leadership. Those are the four tenets I believe every relationship, work relationship, family, marriage, need to be successful.
Yeah. I
And when I
agree.
say strong leadership, I don't mean there's a leader like the husband is the leader. I mean like
Right.
someone, it could be both partners are together leading them on the path to success. So, okay, number one was communication. So, um, I think one of the things you mentioned about give and accept constructive criticism without being a dick about it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's easy to give criticism, it's hard to hear criticism.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes the way to foster a respectful environment is to lead by example and let people give you feedback. And even if they don't give it perfectly, like even if they do come at you and they come in hot,
Yeah.
okay, don't take it personally, listen to it. If it upset you, like wait before you respond or react. Okay, it's hard to hear when someone says you're doing something wrong. It really is. It's especially music. It really is hard to hear. But some, I try to remember this person means well. They're trying to get us whatever it is, whatever the situation is. I'm even going to go back to the math metal story you told. The guy was trying to tell you, hey Wes, I hear a difference between how you're playing it with up and down and how I'm playing it with all downstrokes. And Do I would I nitpick to that extent? I don't think so. I'm not in a math metal band. He is. So I'm saying it's hard to hear constructive feedback. It is sometimes,
Yeah.
but we have to be willing to not be, married to our parts yet, or we have to be willing to hear it. Hey, we don't always have to agree. I'm going to tell you, sometimes I took feedback and I made changes, even though I strongly didn't believe in the feedback I was getting, but it was not a hill I wanted to die on. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to change what I'm doing and just
Yeah.
move on with it. So, if you don't like how someone's giving you feedback, if they're coming in hot, that is something you can say. Like, you can have respect for yourself. Hey, if you don't like how I'm playing something, I would prefer that you say it this way, and
Yeah.
I'll be more willing to hear it. So that feedback thing works both ways. It's very hard to hear, in my opinion, constructive feedback. I think it's easier to give feedback in a respectful way because I think we all feel like we're trying that. Hearing it is very different. So
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best ways that I've ever been offered constructive criticism, and remember, I play primarily in original bands.
mhm.
So, there is room to debate what a part should be. If you're playing Living on a Prayer, there is no room to debate what the part should be. You play the
There's a
part,
right. You play the
you
part.
know. Um, and one person that I played with, the way that he would, instead of saying, "Hey, you're doing that wrong, fix your shit and get it tight," he
Mhm.
would say, "Let's run that section again." And then when we finished that section, he would say, "Something still sounds weird to me. Let's run it again."
The soft sell,
Yeah. And then we would
right?
run it again. And then usually he would say, I think that the four chord there really needs to be a minor seventh. I'm not sure what you're doing, but try it this way and let's see if that works a little better. And then it's up to me to go back, make that change, run the section again. And then I mean, 90% of the time he was right. It did need to be whatever he suggested.
So
And he
in
just
that
came,
situation,
he came at it in a respectful, helpful way because he was focused on making the song as good as it could be
well, original
rather
song,
than,
right?
yeah, original song, rather than making me feel like I was wrong.
Well, because in an original band where you're all writing, there's creative license, right?
Yeah.
Okay, does it mean like wrong is like what's wrong? Like it's a creative choice that someone's making, right?
Yeah.
So if you and I, okay, you and I are in a band together. Let's play out a hypothetical. You and I are in a band together. You have written a song. You've written the song, but you're like, Andrew, you have creative license to play your parts to complement mine. Let's just say that's how it worked.
Okay.
Okay, now you and I are playing together and we stop a song. You're like, hey, in that section, I hear you're doing this chord. What do you think about trying this inversion of it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, all right. I try that inversion. You're like, I love that. And I say to myself, I liked my old chord. Guess what? Wes wrote the song. In this situation, I'm deferring to you because it's your song. My creative license takes second place.
Yeah.
Now, in a band where everyone's collectively writing a song, right? There isn't like a clear cut songwriter. That gets a little dicey. What I would say is, democratic process. Hey guys, I'm hearing it one way, you're playing it a different way. Can we try both and see which one we all like? And
Yeah. That usually shakes things out pretty quick.
right, because now we're in a situation where there really isn't a leader, like a songwriter, it's a collective experience. But you hit on something really important. There is no wrong when it comes to maybe you're hearing it one way, I'm hearing it another way. We both like it out the way we're hearing it. There
Yeah.
isn't right and wrong. And maybe you land in the middle and say, first time we play it, do your chord. Second time we play it, do my chord. Now we're spicing things up. We both
Yeah.
get a little bit of what we want. That's effective communication and mutual respect at work.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
and you didn't tell me I was doing it wrong. You suggested I try an inversion, which is, as you're suggesting, not pointing a finger. There's, again, mutual respect and respectful environment. And so there's ways to navigate these things. But I feel like common goal is important.
Yeah,
So if you both are on, so you and I are in the same band, and what I would say is, if you and I are having conflict, let's say I'm like, Wes, I really like my chord, and you're like, well, I really like my chord. Okay, are we both still on the same road?
right.
Is one really better or worse? Can we meet in the middle and still achieve our goal? If do we have a common goal? And as long as we have that common goal. Now, if you and I have different goals, because let's say you're like, I want the song to sound more like 80s, and I'm like, I want the song to sound more 90s, and you're like, but our goal is 80s. Well, now I have to defer to our common goal,
Right.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I know this sounds like a lot, but the truth is, it's not that hard to keep these things in mind. And as long as you're open to the feedback, and again, like, sometimes someone's gonna come in hot, and as soon as they do, your back goes up, and you're like, I'm not having this discussion,
Yeah.
and that's easy to do. So I try to lead by example, um, and be open to the feedback. Don't get married to your parts. Remember your common goals, and just
Yeah.
communicate. I really liked, I liked your math metal example, because it highlighted something that is kind of like that happens, where I'm playing the notes, I'm playing them in the right tempo, I'm playing them in the right position. Like, are you really going to tell me that you can hear a difference between up and down in the midst of that chaos? I'd argue probably not.
Yeah.
If you close your eyes, you're really gonna, so it's like, I don't know, you have to pick your battles. I feel like he could have picked a battle there,
Yeah.
but chose not to. I don't know. But I do
Yeah. I
think
played
that,
one gig with him and
yeah,
told them to
you
come
knew,
get their shit out of my basement.
yeah, you knew it wasn't for you.
Yeah.
But I really, so I, everything really we've talked about kind of leads up to fostering a respectful environment.
Yeah, it really does. And I want to kind of tack something onto that that may be a little controversial.
Hmm.
Um because there are, in my experience, there are three things that destroy bands.
Okay.
Number one,
Drugs.
a difference in the acceptance of the level of drug and alcohol consumption. Right? If everybody in the band is a 6-pack a night drinker, then you're going to be fine. If nobody in the band is a 6-pack a night drinker, you're going to be fine. You have problems when one person is throwing down a 6-pack at every rehearsal, and one person doesn't drink at all and expects everybody to behave like they do, each of
That,
them.
that can be a
Right?
problem.
So you have to get on the same page with that kind of thing, because drug and alcohol consumption abuse will absolutely break up a band. The
Yeah.
second thing that will break up a band is the drummer. I think we just got to leave that as fact. All right, no, I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was legitimately a joke. But the two things that have broken up the bands that I've been, that's one, drug and alcohol, a difference in drug and alcohol consumption acceptance levels, and interpersonal romantic relationships,
Oh boy.
where things are, so anytime you have any group of mixed genders and, you know attraction possibilities, it might not even need to be mixed genders, um you run the risk of creating secrecy and hiding things from the other band members, and that can be really, really destructive. It's disrespectful to keep secrets from your bandmates, you know especially when one of the secrets is, oh, I'm banging Stella. And if a lot of times a romantic relationship in the context of a band can be difficult, because if the romantic relationship ends poorly, then you lose a band member. And now you've got to replace that person in the band. Sometimes it's the person with the PA that walks, or the recording area,
Oh,
or
yeah.
the rehearsal space. And now you have a huge problem because these two folks broke up. Now, I'm not saying that romantic relationships in the context of a band are always a problem, because they are not. But when they are hidden and secret, or if it's a love triangle, that's going to destroy a band in a hurry. That's the math metal band that I played in for a hot minute eventually met their demise because the singer was sleeping with the guitar player's sister, who was the harmony singer slash sometimes lead singer, and they did not get along. So when they started struggling, the romantic relationship that didn't involve the guitar player started struggling, and that ended up destroying the band.
So you may have noticed I have been uncharacteristically quiet
Yes, you have. I've noticed that.
for the last minute or so.
And I'm absolutely not saying don't get romantically involved with your band
Oh,
members.
I am.
What I am saying is don't hide it,
Yeah, well,
because that's what's going to cause the problems. And if you're going to get intimately involved with somebody in your band, you need to understand that you really are running a risk of destroying the band.
yeah. I think that's ultimately correct. I would say I will admit I have violated this rule more times than I would like to admit.
Okay.
Um,
I accept your apology.
and I was young. Well, I haven't
Yeah.
apologized, but I would, but I was young and didn't know better. Not making excuses, just reasons. I was young and didn't know better. And I didn't have someone like you to warn me against making such decisions. But not only are you correct that dating someone in the band can create friction um, because of secrecy, but it
Mm-hmm.
can also create jealousy.
Yeah.
Right? In a lot of the bands I was in, I was not the only person in the band that was after the other person,
Yeah.
and wanted, had wanted, desired a romantic relationship. I just happened to be the one that got one.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the ensuing jealousy was pervasive
Destructive. Yeah.
and destructive.
Yeah. And
Um,
you also run the risk of, um, whether or not you win in that particular competition,
mhm.
now you've got two people that are romantically involved, and that can shift the dynamic in the band. And now, instead of having, two people who vote independently, you've
Right.
got two people who stick together, even if one of them needs to back off.
Well, or there's just a perception that there's
Right.
favoritism, even if
Yeah.
there isn't. And so, for a variety of, and I'm telling you, for a variety of reasons, if you do it, just be prepared for the inevitable consequences.
Yeah.
Can it work? Yes. Is
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. It can work.
It can also be Fleetwood Mac. So you just have to
Yeah. That's
remember.
exactly what I was thinking of. Because you got
Yeah.
Christine and John McVie, obviously married, right? Who then got divorced and still both stayed in the band.
Well, they had to, because at that point it's a business with a contract. I mean, it's
Yeah. And then you've got Stevie Nicks and um oh my
Lindsey
God, I just
Buckingham.
thank you. I blanked on his name, Lindsey Buckingham, who, one of I think they're like the example of the volatile, creative, romantic relationship
Oh,
that
absolutely.
when it's good, it's great, and when it's bad, it's great. From a creative output.
Yeah. Um, so again, you violate this rule at your own risk, is what I would say, and just be prepared for the consequences.
Yeah.
I have,
Especially if you come in and you're the new person and you're going after the bass player's girlfriend.
oh, that's not nice.
Yeah, not cool.
Not
Not
nice.
cool.
Come on. I said respectful environment. That is absolutely the opposite of that.
Yeah.
All right. So what are some other things we can do to what are some other ways to be successful in the band?
I think we talked about practicing on your own and then showing up ready to rehearse with the band. I think as a band, having a plan for your rehearsal is a good one,
Love it.
because I look at it, I try to look at rehearsal as it can be a bunch of different things. It can be we've got some new material to jam out and solidify and try and that kind of thing. It can be we're going to run the set list for the gig we've got this weekend. It can be, hey, we're getting ready to go into the studio. We need to make sure everything is tight. So the next 3 rehearsals are going to be very focused on making sure everything is tight and trim and ready for the recording, because even now studio time costs money. Sometimes somebody can't show up until a certain time, somebody has to leave at a certain time, so you need to structure the rehearsal to take that thing into account, that hard deadline. Maybe in your rehearsal space there are kids in that house at our age, right? There might be kids that go to bed at a certain time. That was a thing with my band when my daughter was a toddler. I was like, listen guys, we can make as much noise as we want, but at 8:01 we are done.
Yeah.
Because her bedroom was right above the studio. So, we make all the noise we want. 7:59, it's time to pack up and go home, and you're out of the house. We're quiet at that point.
Yeah.
But there's also I think it's important to remember that not every rehearsal needs to be instruments in hand. You can have a rehearsal that's more of a meeting. We need to hammer out some business details. We need to stuff envelopes. I used to send out mailers and postcards and things like that with
Oh,
gigs
now you're
on
dating
them.
your. Oh, I used to make cassettes. I used to put inserts in
Yeah,
cassettes.
yeah. Sometimes
Oh
and
man.
those kinds of things. When we got my Hipper Than Thou's first real demo was a cassette, and we got all the materials. We had the cassettes, the cases, the inserts that were cards. So one night at rehearsal, we all sat down on the floor and we folded the cards and we put them in the cases and we stuck each cassette in. And that was quote rehearsal that night,
Mm-hmm.
because that took a couple hours to do. I don't remember what it was, 250 cassettes or something like that. And then, that was our band time that night, was basically folding cards and stuffing envelopes.
So I got to ask you a question because I ran
Hit
into
me.
this and I'm wondering if you did. I agree with you. Having a plan is a great idea. And I also agree that not every rehearsal has to have instruments at hand. And when you said that, it core memory unlocked.
Nice.
I used to have band members in certain bands that absolutely refused to show up unless it was instrument in hand. Like, I'm not, if it's rehearsal, I'm playing.
Yeah.
You want to meet, you want to stuff envelopes, you want to answer fan mail, I'm
Do
out.
it on your own.
Yeah. Like, I used to run into that a lot. How about you? Did you ever run into that shit?
Um, I think I did, but I don't think I recognized it as aggressive behavior at the time. I was just like, okay, fine. Then, Dave doesn't come to these sessions, kind of
Right.
thing. Which I think fosters resentment when one person in the band isn't willing to do something that kind of looks like a menial task.
Well, but what makes it your job over, and not
Yeah.
his,
Yeah. Well,
and
you find out really quickly that way who really cares about the band.
And I was going to say, like, if it's meeting time, you're not going to come. Well, then you don't get a voice in the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. If you're not there for the vote, you don't get a vote.
Yeah, I
Um,
used to run into that a lot. I don't know why. It wasn't even just the same guy. Like, I just remember hearing that in a couple different bands I was. And again, we were young, and things are different when you're a little older, and you've matured and settled down a little. But yeah, I remember that being a thing in a couple of bands, and one of them was a working cover band. We
Yeah.
were earning money, and for some reason, if it was band meeting night, it was like, count me out. And I'm like, okay,
Okay.
whatever. Like, just don't be involved in the decision then.
Yeah. And I think to that extent, talking about this, having a plan for your rehearsal times or band together times, um, if the dynamic of the band supports it, I think having non-rehearsal time, non-work time can also be valuable. Like, okay, we're not gigging this weekend. Why don't we, meet up and go to the local Mexican dinner and just have dinner and sit around a table and, eat together
Bond.
and yeah, and bond a little bit,
Have
because
no stress.
I think one of the things that can really help create a respectful environment is knowing the people in your band as people rather than strictly as musicians.
It's a good point.
Because if it comes up in conversation that one guy's mom is sick or something, and you're like, oh, maybe that's why he's been so pissy lately. And then you're able to understand a little bit about what their behavior is coming from,
Mhm.
and you can recognize it for what it is. He's not really mad at me. He's mad that his mom is sick and he's taking it out on me, which doesn't make it cool. But then you can go, hey man, listen, I know you're really hot right now because of what's going on with your mom. It's cool. I understand, but don't yell at me. Don't talk to me like that.
So
And it comes from a different place, and you can understand it and recognize things that are going on in your bandmates' lives. Now, I'm not saying everybody in a band has to be total buddy all the time,
no.
and I frankly, in the band that I'm in right now, I don't socialize with them. It doesn't help that we live an hour apart. I probably would if we all lived in the same town,
Yeah.
but I don't, and it affects the band dynamic to a large extent.
Because you only know each other from standing in that same rehearsal room,
Yeah.
going over these tunes, and it's just it's stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I having I like the having a plan for rehearsal is a great idea. I also now recognize a lot of the band situations we were in pre Zoom. They were all those meetings were always in person. These days they don't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah. During the
but
pandemic, the band had Zoom night a couple of times. I'd like to say maybe once a month or so. It helped that we were working on a recording, which everybody was obviously doing separately for the most part. Um, so we had semi-regular just hanging out. How's everybody doing? How you coping with this new world order, this shit sandwich that was the lockdowns and the pandemic and all that stuff?
yeah.
Just to make sure that nobody was going crazy and everybody was doing okay, kind of thing. And it made a big difference. It was important.
So there's one more item on this list that you added, and I absolutely have to discuss this with you because I have never. This is the mad respect for even thinking of something like this. I have never even dreamt of this being something that would be an issue, but I need to talk. We need to talk about this. I need to make
Yeah.
sure you're okay.
Okay, tell me what it is. Say it out to the people, Andrew, and I'll get into it.
All stringed instruments, all stringed instrument players should use the same brand and model of tuner.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll tell you exactly why I put that on my list of
I
how to
have
be
to
in a band,
know.
is because I've played with too many people who either think they don't need a tuner
Oof.
or think that their little little head clip tuner is as good as a stomp box tuner, their little $4 clip-on tuner.
Mm.
And what you end up with in my experience, what you end up with is two and sometimes three people who are almost in tune with each other.
Doesn't that sound good?
Yeah. Yeah,
No.
that I walked out of an audition one time.
Ooh.
I showed up to audition to be the second guitar player in a band. and neither the bass player nor the guitar player owned a tuner, and the guitar player was actually proud of it.
Okay.
So they just tuned to each other and got on with their lives.
I'm sorry. Proud of it.
Proud of it. Yeah. We don't need a
I
tuner. I know what A is. I know what E is.
Did he have perfect pitch?
No.
Oh, oh, did need a tuner. Didn't have perfect pitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there a
And
piano in the room he was tuning to?
no,
Oh,
there was a place called Barco Rebar. It was a rehearsal studio facility. And I didn't even set up my gear. So I used to be kind of a dick about the same brand and same model tuner thing 20 years ago when tuners weren't as good as they are now.
okay.
So now I really just want everybody to have a tuner that cuts their signal and allows them to tune silently.
Please tune silently.
Please tune silently, because nobody wants to hear that.
Oh, nobody.
No ping, 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 ping. Now, let me tell you, I saw a nightmare scenario. It was a band that opened up for us, and they're really good. They're fantastic. I'm not going to say the name of the band, because on the off chance one of them is listening to this, I do not want to embarrass them.
Somehow they'll remember
publicly. So, but they'll probably remember this. So they have in their set, they have one song in drop D. And in that song, so their setup is guitar player, singer, guitar player, keyboard, singer, right? So in this particular song, I believe the other person was playing keyboard instead of guitar, so he didn't need to retune. And the singer retuned with a stomp tuner, and the bass player had a clip-on head tuner. And now there was a lot more going on. They didn't give him enough time to finish tuning before they launched into the song, unfortunately. And then there's so much noise on stage, so much vibration, that his little clip-on tuner could not tune.
Right.
So he ended up actually, unfortunately, just not playing in that song and kind of standing on stage fighting with his guitar, and honestly looking really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then the song ended, and he very quickly tuned back to E, because that he was pretty close to it at that point. And it was as a fellow band person, it was really hard to watch.
Yep.
Where if he'd had a stomp tuner, he could have stomped on his tuner, and even if they launched into the song without him, he could have got himself in tune and gone on.
It's almost like they were trying to teach him a lesson. Like this was a habitual problem, and they're like, "We're just going to do it without him."
I don't know enough about their dynamic to comment on that, but it did kind of have that feeling. But on stage at this venue, which was well attended, was probably not the best time. If they were trying to teach him a lesson, that was probably not the best time to do it.
Yeah. I feel like I've had, not in bands I've been in, although maybe I feel like I've had that situation happen, like adjacent to me, where I've either been in the band that did that, although I can't picture me doing that. I think it happened to a band I watched, which would be an awful coincidence, but that feels like something I've witnessed, where someone in the band wasn't ready and the band just did it anyway.
Yeah,
I feel hard. That's awkward. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but to your point, those clip-on tuners, I got to be honest with you, good, not stage good.
Yeah, they're good in isolation. If you're the only person making noise, some of them are quite good.
At home good.
Yeah, at home good.
I would not rely on a clip-on tuner for the stage, and not when I have to be in tune with another stringed instrument or any other like melodic instrument. I just wouldn't trust it.
You need at that point, you need a tuner that works on signal, not vibration.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've hit a lot of things, and of course there are a lot of other things that we haven't talked about. So if by chance you're one of our 11 subscribers and you are still listening at this point or watching, add your comments in below. Let us know what your suggestions are for how to be in a band. Tell us some of your horror stories that things have gone wrong, whether they're based on one of our, little rules here or not, where you now have gotten enough space and you can recognize who made the mistakes, even if it was you, and you could think of some way to diffuse that situation and, keep that band going in a much better light. I would really love to hear some of those kinds of comments. And I checked the other day. We did at one point in the last week, we had 11 subscribers. So
That's
I think
incredible.
that's hot, man.
Double digits, man. Wait,
Double digits.
we're gonna get us to 12. Ready? Many moons ago, I was in a progressive metal band. Think Queensryche, Iron Maiden,
Okay.
pre-Dream Theater metal,
So
progressive metal.
2 guitar players, some
Two
harmonies.
guitar players, harmonies. Ministry had just come out, so there was a lot of like sliding fifths. All right, a lot of diminished chords. Really, I mean, like this was like one of my favorite bands I was ever in. They were called Rorschach.
Okay.
Not because of the ink blot test, but because they were named after
the Watchmen character.
The Watchmen character. This was well before the movie, so you can only imagine it was based on the graphic novel by Alan Moore.
Right.
Classic. If you've only seen the movie The Watchmen, highly recommend you get yourself a paper, I said paper copy of the graphic novel. It is very different, and the ending is very different, and it's important that you know that. Okay. We played on a gig, I want to say Bonnie's, on the Black Horse Pike in New Jersey, and a friend of mine wanted to come. He was underage, and so his dad told me, do not let him drink. And I said, I will watch him the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay. We go and we play. And I told the bartender, do not serve that gentleman. He's underage. Okay. We finish the gig and I start to pack up, and someone yells to me, yo, your friend's playing Dodge Car on Black Horse Pike.
Oh, no.
Right. So I dropped my guitar, HM Strat in beautiful white, by the way. And
just like mine.
Have to throw that in there. And I run out there and I hit a patch of ice and I go down like a sack of potatoes.
Oh, man.
Twisted my ankle, sprained my ankle.
Oh.
On this patch of ice. He's still out there on Black Horse Pike. I start screaming. This is pre-cell phone days, so I can't call anyone. I'm screaming, help, help, help. Someone finally hears me. They go get him and they bring him over. He's wasted. He's wasted. What happened to don't serve this guy? He's underage.
Yeah.
Okay. He's fall down drunk, and he does, in fact, fall down onto my sprained ankle.
Oh, no.
And I let out a scream that it was blood curdling, the scream I let out. So that was, so long story short, sprained ankle. His father never forgave me for that. I lost that friendship because I was so pissed at the person. I tried to recuperate medical medical expenses from the kid's father. He wasn't having it. Yeah, that was a bad night.
Yeah.
That's a bad night for a lot of people. It sucked. That was one of my worst gigs ever.
That's a pretty bad one.
The gig went fine until after the gig.
The music was fine.
Yeah, it sucked. That was a bad night. So that was my horror story. I think probably my worst horror story.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to top you, but I'm going to tell you my worst gig experience.
All right.
It was one of the times we were a 5-piece, and we had our very first ever headlining gig, which meant opening band played one set and we played two sets, right? So this was 3 60-minute sets is what the gigs were back then. And we had been working hard on getting ready for this. We show up to our drummer's house, which is where we rehearsed, to load out and go to the gig. And the house is sealed by order of the local police.
That's a bad sign.
Yeah. As we then found out, and a couple of the members in the band knew this already, I did not. Our drummer was apparently one of the larger pot dealers in that part of the county, and somebody ratted him out and he got busted by the cops. And yeah, he was sitting in jail awaiting his arraignment, and the house was locked up. That was it.
For pot, really? For marijuana?
Well, this is also probably the late 80s, early
I
90s. So
just say no.
yeah.
The war on drugs.
So we had no choice because we couldn't cancel, because if we had, we would have been burned at this club, and it was like the club in the south end of this county. Oh. And if you didn't play there, you didn't play.
So what did you do?
We went, the remaining four of us and some of our friends that had showed up to help us, we went over to the venue. The opening band was there. We explained to them the situation and begged them, please, could we play on their equipment, which included guitars and everything. We had nothing. And then and they agreed, they understood, they sympathized.
I would have let you. I would absolutely have let you. I'd have been sweating the whole time, but I would have let you.
And one of our friends who had been to a lot of rehearsals and, had been around and had actually gotten us some gigs here and there and continued to do so after this incident. He was like, listen, we knew he played drums, and we're like, can you just sit in and fake your way through it? We'll set the tempos and we'll kind of give you some head nods. We had no stops that night. We didn't do any of the cool stuff. We left out all of the songs that weren't in 4/4. We went with a very cover heavy set, two cover heavy sets that night. I think we probably played 80% covers, because those are songs that were a lot more recognized and easier for him to remember. Mm-hmm. And he actually did just fine. We sounded terrible on other people's gear. And it took about, I think it was a month or 6 weeks before we could get back into the house and get our stuff. And back then I had 2 guitars and 1 amp. And, one of my guitars and my amp were in this dude's house.
Wow.
Yeah. So we got by for that time period with borrowed gear and our buddy playing drums for us until we found a new drummer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And we did eventually get back into the house and were able to retrieve our gear, but it took a long time.
So same band, actually different band. I don't know if you're familiar with Philadelphia at all, but there's a street called South Street.
Okay.
And it's like the trendy street in the middle of the city to be on. At least it used to be. It's probably all like commercial now, but it was a trendy street. And there was 2 basically famous clubs on that street. One, I think, is closed now. It was called JC Dobbs, and it was like legendary. Like there's a video of Tool playing at JC Dobbs before they were famous.
Nice.
Out there on YouTube somewhere. And that's one of the more famous clubs before it closed. There was another club down there, believe it or not, don't remember the name. I told you, bad long-term memory.
Yeah.
I also don't remember the name of the band that's in this story, but my band had a scheduled gig, showed up, okay, on South Street. We were really excited for this gig. It was on South Street. Every bar had a lot of walk-in traffic. So we were really excited, and we had a lot of gear, and we rolled in, and we're here and they're like, sorry, you're canceled because in
Oh,
insert band name is here by surprise, and we're just going to give them the night. They just,
awkward.
this was a band, I don't remember their name. I'll bet you I can find it after we're done. And
Yeah.
if you're listening and I described them, they were from Philly, so they were local boys, and they were like basically like Greta Van Fleet, like Led Zeppelin ripoffs before there was Greta Van Fleet.
Right.
And they were big for like 5 minutes. They might have toured with Silverchair. Do you remember
Oh
Silverchair?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The kids from Australia.
Yeah, they might have toured with them. All I know is they walked in and it was a surprise that they were there. And they're like, we're going to play. And they're like, okay, because they were already famous. They're like, yeah, why wouldn't we let
Yeah.
you guys play? But why not? Because there was a scheduled band who they completely fucked over.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which
they at the very least they should have thrown that band an opening slot.
one would think. But they're like,
Yeah.
nope, you guys can just go home now. And by the way, we're not paying you. And by the way, you're out of luck. And all the people you invited are going to show up and wonder where you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably, I think that night might have been worse than the night where I sprained my ankle, because at least I played that night.
Yeah, I mean, if we got into like bad club management experiences, we'd be here for hours and
All right.
hours and
That's, you know what?
hours.
That's a new episode. All right.
Yeah.
I
So it's
think I'm
time to
ready
move
for some
on.
sweets.
That's right. It's time to move on to dessert and talk about the music that matters. And it's your turn. And I have to say, I did not see this one coming,
Hmm.
and I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you.
So, Andrew, hit us with your music that matters selection for this episode.
Yeah. So because this episode was about how to be or how not to be in a band, I decided to go with the band with the busiest revolving door in the history of rock music, and that is Yes. Um,
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they've had what, 72 members over the
I
years?
mean, they just stop, guys. Just stop it with them. And but here's the surprise, I suppose, because I'm picking 1983's 90125, the first album to not feature Steve Howe.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy,
That's
right?
a that's a little bit of a controversial pick from the Yes catalog,
A
but
little bit of sacrilege.
I think you gotta talk it up. I'm not gonna say I disagree with you, especially if you're talking about people who aren't huge fans of prog music, progressive music.
Mm-hmm.
Then 90125 is not just it's the Yes album
Right.
for a lot of people.
Yeah. Especially because the second album, Big Generator, was, although I like it, it didn't do very well. It had
Yeah.
good songs, but okay. So, um, arguably, yes, one of the most influential bands of our lifetime, right? I mean, they're just,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but prior to 90125, I had not heard a Yes song. I was 13 years old. I was listening to Diary of a Madman, Diver Down, um, what else? Moving Pictures. Those were like the three heavy rotation at the three in the heavy rotation at the time.
Yeah.
Back in Black, of course, that we already mentioned. Um, and then I go to a friend's house. Actually, I go to the singer from Archer, go to his house
Nice.
before there was an Archer. So I go to his house, and his sister has a CD player. I've never seen a CD player before. This is new technology. It's huge. Dude, what CDs do they have? So out comes 90125. They put it on, and I'm like, holy shnikes. I mean, as a guitar player, hearing the opening riff to Owner of a Lonely Heart is
Oh
like,
yeah. It's a monster riff too, man.
yeah. Now, so what I, and if, as you listen to that album, there's a lot of neat guitar stuff on that album. It's not a guitar
Absolutely.
album by any stretch. Arguably, I think it is. But um, so for those that don't know, 90125 was the first Yes album to feature to not feature Steve Howe on guitar. So you go to the Wikipedia article and read all about Yes, and you will see that from the beginning, Yes could not retain musicians. On keyboards, that was Rick Wakeman and then Tony Kaye. On drums, it was Alan White, and then first it was Bill Bruford, then Alan White, and then Bill Bruford, and then Alan White, and Bill, like back and
back and
right,
forth.
Right. But two things remained fairly steady for a long time. First of all, Chris Squire was always the bass player. R.I.P.
Yeah.
Chris Squire, one of the most amazing bass players to walk the planet.
And a Rickenbacker player too.
Yep. And John Anderson on vocals, almost on almost every Yes album for decades. And until this album, Steve Howe on guitar. So after so the album before this had featured a very different lineup than what I just said. John Anderson was no longer in the band, and they released an album with Trevor Horn on vocals.
Was he the guy in the Buggles?
Yes, one of the best producers.
I thought I recognized that name.
Trevor Horn. So Trevor did vocals on the album before 90125. What album featured Tempest Fugit on one of their cooler songs? The only song.
Wasn't that Drama, the Drama album?
Yeah, and you see where I'm going with this? Drama.
Yeah, Drama.
Also, the keyboard player on that album was in Asia, Steve Downs. Yep. So now you're seeing the Asia connection here.
So we're mixing things up here.
Yep. So that was Steve Howe, Jeff Downs, Trevor Horn on vocals. Now, Trevor Horn, great dude, and stepped in to fill an impossible role, but he is not John Anderson, and that tour killed him.
Yeah.
That was the album and tour that Trevor Horn decided, I'm going to go behind the board for the rest of my life, and he did.
Yes, broke Trevor Horn.
Right, but he also produced 90125, and have you heard this album? It is a masterpiece.
Oh yeah, it's a phenomenal album.
Right. Now, also, this was not a Yes album. This was a Trevor Rabin, guitar player, Trevor Rabin solo album. Trevor Rabin was this wonderkind from South Africa. He got a record deal. He wrote all of these songs. They were all his.
Yeah.
And then he met up with Chris Squire, and this became a Chris Squire, Trevor Rabin album. And next thing you knew, it was almost all of it was Chris Squire and Alan White on drums. This was becoming awesome.
Yeah. Well, and they were in the process of creating their own band.
Yes.
That they called Cinema.
Yes. Ooh, I keep saying that.
So, you know, it was when it came out that it said Yes on the cover was almost, it wasn't supposed to be that way.
No, it was not.
It was going to be a new band because Yes had broken up.
Oh yeah, it was done.
Yeah.
And Chris approached John, and his record company approached John and said, you got to hear this. And John heard it and said, I need to sing on that. Yeah. John loved it. And so John Anderson, he rewrote some lyrics. So Trevor Rabin was going to sing everything.
Along with Chris. He's a good singer. He's not a great singer, but he is a good singer.
But his combination with Chris Squire on there was just a really great sound.
Yeah.
And Chris Squire has such a unique, distinctive voice. You've heard Chris Squire sing on every Yes album, and he has this very distinctive voice. But once John heard it and started rewriting some lyrics and rewriting some melodies, it became a Yes album. Once they got John. So, and they got Tony Kaye on keyboards, who had a more modern sound than like Rick Wakeman did. If you know Rick Wakeman, he's very classical.
Oh, very.
Yeah. So
he wears a cape when they play live.
Yeah, if you watch the SpongeBob movie, SpongeBob wears a Rick Wakeman cape.
Nice.
At one point in the movie, during a music video.
That's awesome.
It's actually a cover of I Wanna Rock by Twisted Sister, but it's I'm a Goofy Goober. Anyway, ask me how I know all this.
No.
Okay, so Yeah, he wore a cape. That's all I'm saying. So this was my young self's gateway to Yes. It was the first Yes album I heard. I fell in love with it. Every song is a banger. Every
Yeah.
song rips.
Oh,
Every song.
100% agree.
And as I've gotten older, my favorite songs have changed, but every song is still great. Every song. And um, but it also, when I heard this album, I was like, well, I'm going to go listen to their back catalog. And I was taken by surprise how different those albums were. So remember, the first time I'm hearing Yes was Trevor Rabin. Now all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm hearing Steve Howe, who is a very different kind of guitar player,
Oh yeah,
practically
absolutely.
bluegrass if you think about it. Geez, I mean,
Yeah.
so but I never fell in love with Yes's back catalog the same way I loved 90125. I admit that.
Yeah.
Do I have some favorite old songs? Yeah. And is Steve Howe
Sure.
amazing? Sure. And but this album really for me was like the quintessential like modern Yes album. And I loved Big Generator. It wasn't a great album, but it had some good songs.
Yeah.
And you sent me a video, Trevor Rabin, he retired from like rock music, and
He was
he's
doing
been
movie scores,
yeah,
right?
he's been a composer and doing movie scores for decades. He released a rock, he's releasing a rock album.
Yeah.
So his new song is called Big Mistakes. It's pretty good. Like
Yeah.
it
It
reminds
is.
me, it reminds me of this album, or
Yeah.
at least like the Talk era. Yes, when it was him and it was there was a couple of albums with
Yeah.
Trevor.
And he's 70 years old.
I
You can't, I
don't
mean, and he still has great vocals.
yeah,
I mean, I was impressed with the vocals. I'm like, wow, he's still a really good singer. And then I looked up and he's 70 years old. I'm like, no, no, no. He's a great singer.
yeah. And it
Now.
kind of makes me sad. I hate to say it, it kind of makes me sad. I know at least that Alan White passed away. Okay.
Yeah.
And um Chris Squire passed away. So two members on that album have passed away. Tony is still with us, Tony K. John Anderson, of course, he will live forever because he's a magical man. And Trevor Rabin's still with us. So we're getting into an era where most of the albums we're talking about, one of the band members might be
Yeah.
deceased, which is a little sad. But I listened to that Trevor song and it's really good. I really
Yeah, it
like
is.
it.
I'm super excited about his album that's
Yeah.
when it comes out.
So, in fun fact too, this CD. So when after hearing this CD, I'm like, I'm somehow buying this. First, I bought it on cassette, and then when I could afford it, because I had a job when I was 14. That's how we rolled back in the old days.
Yeah.
I bought a eventually when I could afford it, I bought a portable CD player.
Yeah,
Like
like
after,
a CD
yeah,
Walkman.
right. Eventually, like not when I was 14, but eventually they came out. And this and Jeff Beck's Wired were the first two CDs I ever bought.
Nice.
Because my cassette copy of 90125 was destroyed. Yeah, just destroyed. I had bought two of them at that point. It was my second copy. So
Yeah.
anyway, this is my album. I listen to it now, and I am just shamelessly addicted to the songs. I just love it. I sing them in the car super loud. I love this album.
It's such a good album. And yeah, like
Gave
you.
Yes their first #1 hit, Owner of a
Yeah.
Lonely Heart. Everyone knows the song even today. Like
Yeah.
everyone knows it.
I mean, you hear that weird electric drum intro and then the riff, and it's just, oh,
And
hey,
the
yeah, I love this song. And you reach for the volume
and the
knob.
weird horn stab in that song is actually
Yeah.
a sample from an old song, which I never knew.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that either.
The other thing is Trevor Rabin, they used things on this album that had not been previously used in a lot of recording, like not this album, but the one after it. Trevor Rabin and Trevor Horn did it with two Macintosh computers synced up.
Yeah.
It was the first time that had ever been done. I mean, that's kind of wicked. So this was still pre computer recording era. But they used a Fairfield, CMI Fairfield on this record, and like there was just a lot of cool sounds on this.
Technology, yeah.
Yeah, and we're tube amp snobs, and some of my favorite guitar tones are on this record recorded with GK or Rockman gear.
Yeah.
It's in the hands of the right producer and musician, anything will sound good. And Trevor, even today, if you listen to his guitar tones, he is not one to rely on like old tropes. He does not
Yeah.
sound like it. I'm Stratton to bassman. He's a pioneer of digital equipment, and he's always going to break new ground. So I love that about him.
Yeah. My introduction to this album, like I knew who Yes was because of some of the cool kids in my high school listened to Yes and the Grateful Dead and all that kind of stuff. Or they might not actually been the cool kids, but they were people who I looked up to as musicians at 16 years old. But there, like I was into Rat and Twisted Sister and Iron Maiden, and I wasn't going to listen to Yes. It just that I knew it was a prog band, and it just wasn't happening. So after that, I didn't hear a Yes song that I knew was a Yes song until Owner of a Lonely Heart came on the radio, and I was like, wow, that was a really great song. And then MTV played an edited cut of the 9012 live concert recording. And what they did is they took, so and I had to look it up to be sure. So the set that they played on the 9012 live tour was 16 songs long. It was half new songs from this version of the band and half classic Yes songs. So on what made the video was they're probably the three most popular old songs. I've Seen All Good People, Roundabout, and the other one I'm spacing on the name, but it was Starship Troopers, right? So for MTV, they cut out the encore, they cut out Starship Troopers, they cut out I've Seen All Good People. They only focused on the songs from 90125. And that, I feel like that concert video was on Friday night on MTV like every week for 6 months. I saw it repeatedly.
Yeah.
And so they edited it down to fit within an hour, and focus on those Rabin era songs. And at the time, I didn't know that wasn't always the band.
Right. You don't know. You're a kid. You see band called Yes. You're like, okay, this is Yes.
Yeah. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when a band called GTR came out with their album.
Steve Howe and Steve Hackett, right?
Steve Howe and Steve Hackett. And that's how I found out about Steve Howe. And of course, he was in Asia, which had several big hits by that point. And that's kind of where I was like, oh, Steve Howe's been in other bands. And he was the original guitar player in Yes, and it kind of all started to click and come together. And so it was really cool. And I went back. It took me a long time to get into the older Yes albums, because the way I do it, when I discover a band, I listen to that album, whatever it is that I discover, and then I go back one. And if you go back one from 90125, you get Drama, and that album sucks.
Yeah, it's not a great album.
No, it's not. I did not enjoy that at all. So it was years before I listened to anything else by Yes. And I heard, I want to say it was I've Seen All Good People. It might have been Starship Troopers. I never realized that Roundabout was a Yes song. I'd heard that a bunch, but I didn't know that was a Yes song. And all the pieces started coming together. And I've got several of their older albums. But I want to show off to you and anybody who is watching this on the YouTube. After the tour they did for this album, they released 9012 Live, the solos.
I remember that.
Which is, they also cut out all the solos from the concert. And it's got, am I holding it in front of the camera? I can't tell. It's got pictures of the boys at the top.
Yeah.
And it features Hold On, and then Tony Kaye's solo,
Mhm.
Trevor Rabin's solo, John Anderson's solo. Then it features Changes, and then Amazing Grace, Chris Squire solos Amazing Grace, and then Chris Squire and Alan White combined for a lengthy solo. And it's basically an expanded maxi single. But I got this album right when it came out. I went to one of those special record store, opens at
Mhm.
midnight kind of things, and I didn't get there in enough time to get the album that I really wanted, but they still had copies of this. And so I've had this probably since it came out, which 1985 or 6
That's
probably.
awesome, man. Way to bring the
And
heat.
yeah, so I wanted to show that to you. And I really enjoyed a lot of the guitar playing on this album, because it was very much unlike what I was listening to
It's not
at the
traditional.
time. And then you put John Anderson's vocals on top of it. And I was lucky enough to I went to a clinic that Alan White did at a local music store.
Mhm.
Um, not because I'm not a drummer, but I just wanted to go to one of those things, and he came in and he played a little bit and he took some questions. He was probably there an hour. He signed some flats. You remember they used to do the little flats that was like a cardboard reproduction of the album cover.
Mhm.
He signed a bunch of flats, and some of those kids that I'd gone to high school with were there, and it was a good time. And yeah, it's just such a great album and such an anomaly in Yes's catalog.
Mhm.
And I thought it was really cool that over, since then, they've actually, because Steve Howe was pissed when this album came out with Yes on the cover,
Mhm.
even though the band had broken up, because, apparently he didn't know what was going on. And this was a huge surprise to him. um, but eventually they were able to kind of reconcile and piece
Yeah.
things back together. And later on, Yes not
Union.
only recorded, but they also toured with both guitar players,
And
which
both
really,
drummers
and yeah, both
and
drummers,
both
and
keyboard players.
yeah, they had
Yeah, it
these
was
big
called Union.
tours.
It was called Union, and it was a huge round in the round.
Yeah, and
I saw them.
it was amazing. Oh, you saw that tour?
Yeah, I
Oh,
saw
that's
them on
awesome,
that
dude.
tour. It was like I said, it was in the round. So I remember distinctly that Alan White played a drum kit and Bill Bruford stood and played a standing Simmons kit.
Cool.
Like I can't, I have no way to describe it except you have to see it to believe it. Like Bill
Yeah.
Bruford standing there shaking his hips like
Having a
while
good
he's
time.
playing a standing Simmons kit. And I'm like, what is happening?
That's
It was just
awesome.
weird. Like you hear this monster drummer and built and he's just and both guitar players. And of course, when they were playing the old Yes songs, Trevor was fine. But when we were playing the new songs, Steve Howe was a fish out of water. Like it's
Yeah.
just not his wheelhouse.
Yeah, and
But
it's weird to hear, like I've seen videos where they play Owner of a Lonely Heart and Rabin is not in the band, and it's just like you can tell Steve Howe is not into it. Like he's just playing it because it's his job,
right, yeah.
which, I might be a little bitter if I was in his place too. But I never got to see Yes. I never got to see Asia, but I did get to see GTR. And I didn't know about Genesis at the time, you know.
Wow.
And I still don't have any Peter Gabriel era Genesis albums, because believe it or not, I'm really not that into prog music. But I do have a bunch of Steve Hackett's solo albums.
Really?
And yeah, he does like regular music, but he also did several classical guitar albums, and they're
Okay.
fantastic.
Yeah,
You
he's a
know, so
monster.
so I went to see GTR because it was this super group of these two monster prog players basically playing pop music.
Hmm.
That GTR album was not terribly well received, but it's it's a monster pop album, it's really good.
Yeah.
But so it was interesting to put all those pieces together in my late teens when all this happened.
Hmm. There was an
I really
era
enjoyed it.
when if you just take Yes and you think about all the different iterations of Yes, there's this weird thing that happens over the course of several decades where they touch almost every British band that ever existed in
Yeah.
the like Alan White played with John Lennon. Cozy Powell was in Asia and ELP.
Yeah.
And Steve Hackett was in GTR and Genesis, and Peter Gabriel. Like, you can just keep going, 7 degrees to Steve Howe, or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, if someone did this at one point, like they took the Yes lineups and they just did like this huge tree of life, and it's like every British band that ever existed was connected. It was very funny. I'll see if I could find it sometime. But
That's very cool.
yeah. All right. Well,
That's it for this episode, folks. Thanks for sticking
wow.
it out with us. We're going to be back with our next episode, and we're going to get back into a little more hardcore gear of a gear discussion. We're going to talk about pedal boards and pedals and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun and informational and maybe a little cathartic, and we'll engage in some healing.
And short. We're going to keep it under 7 hours, I believe.
Yes, that's always our goal, but we may or may
So
not hit it.
so real quick, www.differentstringspodcast.com, or find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely.